Hey, thanks everybody for coming on an evening, 7 on the East Coast. We had a lot of requests to do. This is the third of the same presentation, a little tweaked now because we've gotten some word from College Board about what the modified 2020 exam is going to look like. But we had some requests to do this in the evening, so I thank you very much for coming. This is our agenda tonight. We are going to do some, I'll just do introductions and an overview of the agenda right now. We're going to look at some resources. I'm going to tell you what I know, which probably isn't any more than what you know about what the new exam is going to look like. But we are going to get some ideas about why the two activities that I'm going to talk about tonight are specifically well suited to scaffold for that exam. We'll look at some resources we have for next year when you will be doing, hopefully, back to doing an FRQ3 that are going to be really well suited for that. I won't spend a lot of time on that now that we know that FRQ3 is not on this year's exam. I want to just tell you a little bit about and tell you where to look for some resources we've been adapting for at-home learning on top of the ones that I'm talking about tonight. And I'll try to do, spend some time, leave some time to do some Q&A at the end. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with street law. I'm actually going to ask you a little bit later to register how familiar you are with our materials. But we're a small nonprofit outside of DC. And we basically, my job is the Senior Director for Teacher Professional Development and Curriculum. Also on the line, we have Jen Wheeler. She's going to answer some of your questions in the chat and in the Q&A. She is the other half of the teacher PD team. And we bring a lot of teachers to DC to learn about the Supreme Court. We travel the country teaching teachers about democracy, education, and teaching law-related subjects in their classrooms. And there's my email. Jen Wheeler is jwheeler@streetlaw.org. We also have in the background Ben Marks. He is our communications coordinator, and he's going to be doing some of the troubleshooting that we might have and some polling for us. He also might show up in the chat room or answering some of your questions in Q&A. So now we'd like to know who is here with us today. So this is kind of targeted at AP government teachers, but I know from the last two that we've done that we have some people who maybe aren't. So it'd be helpful for me to be able to customize this to who is here to see who's here. So Ben, if you would put up the poll about who's here, if you could just register who you are on that poll. If you don't see yourself on there, you can just click other. And Ben Marks is going to show us those results in just a moment. Ben, can you show us the results? Can it be live or do we have to wait till it's done?
They're currently still polling.
Okay.
You should be able to see it, but I'll publish it here.
I'd like everyone else to be able to see it too. Okay, well, while people are still polling, I'll talk about what our outcomes are. I am going to try to, oh, okay, great. So we're mostly AP government teachers. That's good to know. Okay, excellent. We have some US government teachers, a couple law elective teachers, civics, even a couple students. I'm not sure how helpful you're going to find the students, but maybe you will. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the exam modifications. I'm not an expert on this. It's mostly just for you to see how the activities that I'm going to propose are related to what the exam is now going to look like. We're going to look at two specific case study methods that I think work really well with the two FRQs that will be on the exam. And like I said, just super briefly, hopefully you'll be able to create your own FRQs by the time we're done here today. So there's a couple ways for you to participate in this webinar. One is to leave a question in the Q&A. So you should see that on your taskbar. They look a little bit different, I think, depending on the version you have. But you should see a little thing, it looks like dialog boxes that says Q&A. Those would be a good place to drop content questions, and Jen will deal with a lot of those questions while I'm talking, and that's where I'll look at the end to be able to take questions for Q&A. Chat, you might have to open chat. It might just say chat on your toolbar. You might have to go under the little bar that says more with 3 dots. If you do that, you can either choose to send a message just to the panelists. So if we're having technical difficulty, or you want to say something particularly to me, Jen, or Ben, or panelists and all attendees, I think it says, even though I wrote participants. That will send it to everybody. And there is a place where I'm going to encourage you to do that, 2 places actually. So if you want everyone to see your ideas, please select panelists and all attendees. And you can raise a hand to ask a verbal question. So if there's something really timely that you feel like you need to ask in the moment, then you can raise your hands. Okay. So one of the things that we did to try to respond to the AP redesign 2 years ago was to make case summaries, which I'll talk about in a moment, the specifics of them for all 15 of the required cases. And you know, if you've been teaching the subject for a while, that one of the really big differences between the legacy exam and the redesigned exam is that a College Board has come out and said, these are the 15 cases that you need to know very well. You need to know all of the information about those cases. You know, you need to know even some famous dissents. And you need to be able to compare the cases to more recent cases so that these cases would be seen as a precedent too. So we provided case summaries for all 15 of these cases, downloadable as Word files so that you can edit them, and also individually. So we responded to, originally we had them all individually, and the AP Gov Facebook page, we heard the cry for them to be all in one document. So you now have the ability to download them all as one or in other ones. So Ben, I'm curious to see how many of you have used these materials before, or if this is the first time. So if you could put up the poll, Ben, about people's use of our materials, I'd be curious to see what your level of familiarity is with these. You could take that poll, please. Your options are, I've used the 15 APGoPo SCOTUS cases. I've used other street law materials, but not the AP cases. I've used street law materials for my background, but I haven't used them with students. I knew about street law, but haven't used them, or I was unaware that they even exist. Ben, can you post that? There you go, thank you. Okay, great. So it looks like a majority of you have used them in one way or another, and that's good, so I know where we're coming from. Okay, so the thing about these case summaries, and I won't spend a lot of time on this since most of you are familiar, but all of these case summaries have at least these 5 ingredients. A lot of them also have background before the facts. So for instance, I was working on one today about the Electoral College faithless elector case that will be argued in May. And I have a big background section on the Electoral College because you have to know about the Electoral College to understand the case. But they have at least these 5 elements, and we like to think of them as ingredients. And with these 5 ingredients, you can make a bunch of different recipes. And our case study activities are those recipes that you can make with these ingredients. We have hundreds of case summaries in our free store that you can use, and you can take them and manipulate them. They're downloadable as Word documents, so very easily editable, so that you can move things around and make different activities. It looks like we call it a store, and it very much looks like a store. You're asked to put things in your basket and you're asked to check out, but I promise that you will not be asked for any information about your credit card or for any money. The only thing we charge for are textbooks. We have a little bit of swag, and there is a mock trial and moot court handbook that or guidebook that we charge for. But all of these teacher materials that you can put right in your classroom are free of charge. So don't be intimidated by the payment button. So the case study methods that I'm going to focus on today are classifying arguments and applying precedents. And as an extension to the classifying arguments one, also the judicial opinion writing. The other ones are great activities. We just only have an hour tonight, so we don't have time to talk about them. I especially like the mini moot court or the full moot court for your classroom when you are in the classroom. They're a little bit more challenging to do through distance learning. Those can all be found at that link as part of your materials, and I'll talk about the material links later. But as part of your materials, you'll get this PowerPoint. So I've embedded a lot of websites in the PowerPoint itself so that you can access them. Okay, so that's what I wanted to tell you mostly about our case summaries that apply directly to AP Government. So let's talk just briefly about the APGoPo exam this year and what we know. So I'm gonna not spend a lot of time speculating about what we don't know, just talking about what we absolutely do know and how that relates to our materials. So what we know for sure about timing, I put the box from the College Board site so you can read it in their words, and then you can see my little synopsis. What we know about timing is that it will be 45 minutes with 2 FRQs only, no multiple choice. They are old FRQ 1 and 4, but slightly modified because these are smaller time periods than you would have had for those FRQs. So the new FRQ 1 is old FRQ 4, an argument essay, and it's going to be 25 minutes, 60% of students' grades. And FRQ 2 is the old concept application FRQ 1, and it will only be 15 minutes. So if you add those times up, and I know social studies teachers are notoriously bad at math, but even we can figure out that doesn't equal 45 minutes, and that's because they have an additional 5 minutes to upload responses. So that's what we know about timing and how the time will be split. What we know about format, we know it's at home, we know it's online, we know it is open book and note, because how could it not be at home and online? And we know it will cover units 1 through 3. So those are, again, from the College Board website. They're units 1, 2, and 3. So one of the things that what happened with the redesign is a lot of discussion about what order the units should be taught. Should they be taught 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Should they be taught in the order that a lot of teachers were used to teaching or thought that there was more logic behind teaching? And so one of the issues I know is that a lot of teachers were saving Unit 3, particularly about civil liberties and civil rights, for later on in the year, and perhaps some of you didn't quite get through that unit and are trying to get it in. So what does that mean for SCOTUS cases? You've probably already looked this up, but maybe just for some affirmation. It means that all cases except Citizens United v. FEC are going to be on this exam, or could potentially be on this exam. So Unit 1 and 2 had those 5 cases in them, and Unit 3 has all of the civil liberties and civil rights cases. So I know that one of the questions people have had is, shouldn't Citizens United be in Unit 3 because it's a free speech case? You could certainly make an argument for that, and I'm not questioning College Board, but I will tell you that in the CED, in the course and exam description, that Citizens United does fall in Unit 5. So again, I probably wouldn't neglect to teach it. I'd probably teach it anyway, just to be sure, that that's where it does fall in their exam. Okay, so again, briefly, I am not an expert in this in any way. I just thought I'd share what I found in making this up and let you know how our materials relate to it. So for the argument essay, a lot of things are the same. We're going to look at the rubric so you can see what is different. But it's still the same idea where the students have to make a thesis, they have to have a claim, they have to use evidence, they have to use logic and reasoning and explaining that. So SCOTUS arguments and our materials could be used for students, by students, to provide evidence from knowledge of course concepts to support the claim. So the example that I thought about this one is maybe there might be an argument essay about gerrymandering or something about creating commissions to redistrict in order to prevent people from gerrymandering. So students might be able to use facts that they learned in Baker v. Carr and Shaw v. Reno and apply those as evidence that they bring into the case. So I'm going to invite you now, and please use all panelists and attendees, to write in the chat box if you can think of examples of argument essays that might use the 15 required court cases, and we could leave Citizens United out if we wanted, to help to support some kind of argument essay. So we have stuff with separation of powers and Marbury. That's a great guess. So yeah, so I invite you to speculate in the chat if you want to about how you think SCOTUS cases might show up in the argument essay. I'm going to show this in an enlarged form, so please don't strain your eyes looking at this, but just to let you know, if you haven't already discovered it, that at the College Board site, you can see the rubric for the new FRQ1, the argument essay. I'll enlarge the parts that are pertinent. So this is what really changes. An additional point is going to be added this year to award points for each piece of evidence separately. So there's more chances for them to use evidence. And they must provide 2 examples of evidence relevant to the topic. That's a good place for them to use the things that they will learn in the classifying arguments activity. Also, you'll see, oh, sorry, that's on the next slide. You'll see on this one, the big bold is that they don't have to do the alternative perspective this year. It's not asked for, it won't be rewarded points. But they do have to show how their evidence is supported with reasoning. And so again, what the activities we're going to look at today is going to be helpful for. Okay. This is just the same thing really in a narrative form as opposed to on the rubric. An additional point for a second piece of evidence, additional point for reasoning, and eliminating the alternative perspective. The second kind of FRQ this year is the concept application. This one I really think is going to be a great place to put in some potentially. They could use Supreme Court cases. So this concept application is going to use an authentic scenario and ask the students to explain political institutions' behaviors, processes. And they have to show that transfer, they have to show that application of knowledge. So the authentic scenario might be a case being brought before the Supreme Court. So the idea of people bringing a case before the Supreme Court, or it might be an analogous situation to one of the 15 cases. So so my example for this one was maybe ripped from a real life case. Is a couple years ago, 10 years ago maybe, in Florida, there was a principal who outlawed rainbow t-shirts because he thought that it was, you know, somehow expressing LGBTQ ideas that he didn't like. And so to protest against the principal's banning of rainbow t-shirts, the students started wearing Pink Floyd shirts, reading rainbow shirts, Care Bear t-shirts, anything, Apple logos. and some of them got suspended. So it could be something where that's the scenario and students use Tinker v. Des Moines to apply that. So if you would want to write some samples in the chat box now, I think it's great if you want to speculate on some of those cases. Oh, good. There's some good ones. Okay, we're going to talk about classifying arguments, the first, one of the first activities. This activity, I think, is really going to be good to scaffold for the argument essay. Students are given facts, issues, and unmarked arguments for a case. And students are going to be asked to analyze the arguments from both, look at the arguments and decide which side that argument would support. In a moment, I'm going to show you an example from McDonald v. Chicago. Again, you're going to get this PowerPoint, so that's where you can find it in the street law store. And I think looking at it will give you a better idea. So take a look at those arguments for a moment and think to yourself, do these arguments support McDonald or Chicago? So if you're not familiar with this case, your AP government teachers, you probably are. McDonald was asking for the basic ban of handguns in Chicago to be declared unconstitutional as a violation of the Second Amendment. And the city of Chicago was saying that their near ban on handguns should stand as constitutional. So take a second to look at those.
Hey guys, this is Jen. So what you just saw, it was not just on you. Kathy's computer just shut down. Kathy is the absolute expert in all things AP government related. So we're gonna kind of delay for just a moment. If you happen to be a part of my webinar last week on deliberations, this very thing happened. And we got back up and running probably with like 5 minutes, within 5 minutes. So if you want to take a look at the materials, there she is. Okay.
Sorry.
How about you keep going, Kathy, and I'll advance so that we don't have to
Okay.
go through the screen share.
Okay, I apologize about that. Okay, you can go to the next one. And yeah, so how you would do this. So normally we suggest that this activity be done by handing the students that worksheet that you saw, or cutting out, making those arguments larger and cutting them into strips and having the students manipulate them. But since we can't do that online, what we've suggested is either downloading the activities, the classifying argument activities that are already pre-made from the store. So I think there are probably about 15 pre-made in the store if you're not very picky about which case that you use. Or you can use any case you choose to use, any of the 15 cases or any other case, by downloading the summary as a Word document, and then keeping the top parts, the background, the facts, the issue, but taking those arguments and cutting and pasting them. And so just in random order. And then you can either post that list like you just saw for McDonald v. Chicago, or you can send it to them, email it to them, put it in a packet. So how it's done online, right there, good. So since you can't do that, a possibility would be to make the activity just like you would have before, and then email it to them and ask them to cut and paste them back into the right section. So have label a section McDonald, label a section Chicago, and then cut and paste them in a way that all of the McDonald arguments are on one list and all the Chicago are on the other ones. And as a possible extension to that, you could ask them to prioritize them, to put them in order from what they think is the most compelling argument for McDonald to the least compelling, and the same thing for Chicago. You could also ask them to print out that worksheet, do it by hand, scan and return it to you, or send it back to you. I know some schools are doing packet drop-offs. Or if you noticed in the McDonald example, the arguments were numbered. So if you numbered your arguments, you could have the students post in a discussion board, and you could have them say arguments 1, 3, and 7 support McDonald, and arguments 2, 4, and 6 support Chicago. After the students submit their answers, in whichever way you're going to have them submit them, you could either just have them either access or send them the full summary to compare for them to see. Another option that you might be able to do is to extend the activity altogether and have them do the judicial opinion writing activity. So after the first one of these, there were some suggestions for us that we write this up as an activity. So now in the store, hot off the presses, you can find the You Be the Justice judicial opinion writing activity. So the students would take, after they classify the arguments and list them in order of how compelling they are, they could decide who wins this case, who should win this case. Should Chicago win this case, or should McDonald win this case? And so they can write the opinion. The activity sort of walks them through writing the activity, writing the opinion. It asks them some pointed questions. It gets them going in the right direction. And then you could have them post their opinions in a discussion board or whatever method you use for that. And other students could have to concur with the decisions that they agree with, but maybe for different reasons, or dissent with the opinions that they disagree with. Okay, if you can go to the next slide. Okay, one of the possibilities also for, and just leave it here, but one of the possibilities also for the dissenting opinions are to have students listen to opinions that are handed down. So the court not too long ago, maybe 10 years ago, started recording the opinions being handed down. So for a very long time, they've been recording the arguments. And you can listen to the justices handing down opinions and occasionally dissents. And if you're looking for a really great dissent, I would suggest Ruth Bader Ginsburg's in last year's case, Peace Cross case, the Maryland Capital Park and Planning Commission via the American Humanist Association. It's a great case. Okay, so that activity, I think, scaffolds really well for the argument essay, where students need to know facts, they need to use reasoning, they can look to see what reasons support which arguments. We're going to move on now to the applying precedents activity, which I think is perfectly suited to the new FRQ2. Can you go to the next slide? Okay. Okay, so in the applying precedents activity, students receive the facts, issues, arguments, and the precedents of a comparison case. And so they either already know the required cases that you've taught them, the 15 required cases, or you can give them the full handouts that talk about those cases. So like in the one we're going to look at, McDonald v. Chicago, again, is the precedent case. So if you've already really taught McDonald v. Chicago, you don't need to give them much for that. If you haven't, you might want to give them the summary for McDonald v. Chicago as well. This is the exact same skills that they're going to need in FRQ2, where they have to take an authentic scenario and apply what they know. So if that authentic scenario has anything to do with any of the subjects that are around the around the Supreme Court cases, they can use those to apply to the precedent. Okay, can you go to the next case? The next slide. Okay, so we have a companion document to our 15 cases, which is called the comparison case list. And so you can go to those addresses. It's also included in the link that you're going to get at the end of this, and you probably already received when you registered. And for each of the required cases, we suggest comparison cases that we have in our free store. So we don't suggest any cases that we haven't already written up in the case summary format. So I know that you'll look at this list and think, oh, there's a really great comparison case for one of the cases for Citizens United, and you don't have it on your list. And I know that's true, but we do have the ones that are free and available in our website. So you go and you find a case, and then you find a comparison case, and you can do this activity that we're going to look at very easily. So can you go to the next one? Okay. So we're going to use a case called Tims v. Indiana in a second to think about applying precedents. So you would take, for the comparison case, you would take and delete the decision and the opinion. So the students would only have the background, the facts, and the issue. As I said before, you give them however much information you think they should have about the required case at the beginning of the year. Could be a full summary. By the end of the year, you might not give them anything on the required case. And then you would delete precedents if you wanted to. So if you expected them to know everything about McDonald v. Chicago, you would delete that. And then you can cut and paste the names into a template, which I'll show you in a moment. Okay, can you go to the next slide? So I mentioned the case that we're going to look at the activity for right now is called Tyson Tims and a 2012 Land Rover v. State of Indiana. And some of you might be familiar with it. It was a case in last year, and it ended up being a really big case because, spoiler alert, it ends up incorporating the excessive fines clause of the 8th Amendment. So can you go to the next slide, please? So the 8th Amendment, of course, has a lot of clauses in it, and the least famous of those clauses is the excessive fines clause. And so that part of the 8th Amendment had not been incorporated before last year. To incorporate it means that the Supreme Court decides that it is fundamental to our scheme of ordered liberty, that is the words that they choose to use, and that the 14th Amendment due process clause should apply that against the states. So that part was not applied. In Indiana, there was a civil asset forfeiture law that allowed the state to take vehicles and other things that were used in crimes if they facilitated the crimes. Okay, go ahead. So in this case, Tyson Tims had a windfall of money because his father passed away and he got some health insurance money. And with that money, he bought a Land Rover. He was involved in some drug deals and the police confiscated his Land Rover. So he challenged that law that took his $54,000 Land Rover for a very small drug deal and said that that was an excessive fine. So this case reached the Supreme Court and they were trying to decide, is this right, fundamental enough to people's liberty in order to be incorporated? So the last case that incorporated a right was McDonald v. Chicago, which incorporated the Second Amendment. And so they used this case a lot in the arguments, in oral arguments, in the briefs. They cited McDonald v. Chicago as a standard for how important a right has to be in order to be incorporated against the state. So if you wanted to use these two cases, because they have the incorporation comparison, you would give the students information about both cases and ask them to look and see. Can you go to the next slide, please? It's bigger on the next slide. You would ask them to decide whether the precedent, in this case McDonald, is analogous enough to get the same outcome, so similar enough to get the same outcome, or is it distinguished? Is it different? So there's a little template that you can use that will be on the website, it will be on the slide show when you get it, that you can just copy and paste, where you can take any 2 cases, any of the 15 required cases, and any of the probably, I don't know, over 45, 50 to 75 comparison cases that we offer, and build your own applying precedents activity. Okay, go to the next one. So doing that activity in real life, you would probably just hand out the summaries and hand out the worksheet. But since we're not living in that world right now, we had some suggestions for doing it online. And that would be to send them the summaries and then ask them to answer the questions and apply the required cases. You could do that in a synchronous class. It would be a great way to have a discussion in a synchronous class, or have them do it individually and submit it, or, and this isn't here, but you know, students can work in Google Docs. So if this is the kind of thing that you think maybe needs to put some heads together to tackle, because this is a pretty higher order thinking skill to be able to do this, to take one case and apply it to another. One scenario and apply it to another. So maybe Google Docs, where students can work together in cooperative learning groups, is the way to go. The other thing that you can do afterwards is give them the full case summary of the comparison case and write your own FRQs. I'm not sure where we are now. Okay, you can go to the next one. Okay, not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want to leave time for Q&A, but just to let you know it's out there, because hopefully next year we will be writing an FRQ 3 again. Go ahead to the next one. So I mentioned that comparison case list before. This is going to be helpful in writing your own FRQ as well. Go ahead. In FRQ3, generally, there is a synopsis of a case. So in this case, you would maybe take Tims, and the example that I've been using throughout with Tims and McDonald. There would be a little write-up about what the Tims case is about, pretty much like what I just did orally during this presentation. And then the students have been asked pretty formulaic tasks. One is that they identify the constitutional clause that is common to both. In the case of these 2 cases, it's not a constitutional clause so much as a concept. So maybe we would ask them to identify the due process clause of the 14th Amendment as a tool to incorporation. And then based on the constitutional clause, explain why the facts led to, in this case, a similar holding, because both of those rights were considered fundamental enough to be incorporated. So, and then C is always sort of a wild card, because C is the same kind of thing that you're going to see in FRQ2, where they ask you to take a scenario and then also bring in, you know, political processes. So all you have to do to make your own FRQ, C is a little trickier, but for the first 2 really is to insert the names of the cases that you choose to give them information on. And then for C, you know, you would want to probably look a little bit at what the other concept is. So for instance, in McDonald and Tims, it might be something about federalism, because in both cases, states had laws that they thought didn't conflict with the Constitution, and the supremacy clause was used to say, no, these really are in the Constitution. So, okay, go ahead. Oh, I'll just mention that there is a stable rubric for FRQ3. You know, they're always looking for the same things. And just in a lot of ways, like the FRQs are going to be asked to write this year, it asks them for facts, it asks them for decisions, it asks them for reasoning and comparison. So I don't think if you spent some time writing FRQ3s before school went virtual that you wasted time, because I think a lot of the a lot of the skills that they used in writing this kind of an FRQ would be helpful in the new ones as well. Okay, next. Okay, so I want to talk about some resources, and then I'm going to turn it over to you. Talk about some resources that we've been developing. So Jen and I and Ben have been hard at work making a new web page. So if you haven't been to our website in the last couple weeks, you haven't seen it, about at-home learning. So this web page will let you will give you some ideas about things that you can do at home, maybe things that you've done in your classroom before, but we've taken the time to think through how they might be adapted. Things like deliberations, which you might think would be difficult to adapt, but Jen did an excellent job thinking through how to do that. She did a webinar last week about how to adapt deliberations. So you can even on a link at that page, you could watch her her video from her webinar about how to adapt those. I did one for law elective teachers that I'll just mention because I saw we had some law elective teachers in the group. One of the things that we suggest on that page is using SCOTUS in the classroom. And so if you're not familiar with this part of our web page, we pick a couple cases each year to write a case summary for, like we were talking before, in that very formulaic way, and to gather some other resources for. The ones that we wrote up this year are these cases, Bostock and Zarda and Harris Funeral Homes v. Amy Stevens. The first two cases are about employment discrimination based on sexual orientation. And the last case is about employment discrimination based on transgender status. So these cases are 14th Amendment equal protection cases. Okay, next slide. We also wrote about New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. City of New York. This is, of course, a great comparison case for McDonald. It doesn't have a decision yet, so you couldn't do the part where you're asking them if the decisions are similar because this one hasn't been decided yet, but you could certainly take that scenario. So what the new FRQ2 is going to be, where you're given a scenario and you have to apply what you know. The scenario could be the situation in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association. This one is primarily about being able to travel with your firearm. And the most recent one that has been put out is June Medical Services v. Russo. This is an abortion law case from Louisiana. Of course, Roe v. Wade is a great comparison case to this. I also just finished today Chiafalo v. Washington, which is the faithless elector electoral college case. So that's going to have to go through expert review, but once it does, it will be up on the website too. So look for that one if you think you might want to do something after the exam as well. It's going to be argued a day before your exam, I think. It's going to be argued on, I believe, May 13th. So, okay. In your link as well, you're going to get this sheet, which is resources for teachers. And it gives you a lot of other links to resources that might be helpful, the street law textbook and things like that. Okay, next one. Also just wanted to mention that we, along with the Supreme Court Historical Society, are caretakers of the landmarkcases.org site. There's a lot of great information there. Can you go to the next one? About a lot of the cases. So it's not exactly the 15 APGoPo cases, because we established this website long before they picked 15 cases. But there's a lot of overlap, of course, because they are landmark cases. So you'll find Roe there, you'll find Marbury and McCullough there, all that kind of stuff. For each case, there's background material listed on 3 reading levels, which might be helpful. We are, though, right now doing a major upgrade of this website, and so there are some missing links and things like that. So please check and make sure before you assign anything on this from this page to your students. that you check that. But under the teaching pull down there are actually, you know, activities that you could send your students to, give them the link and say, I want you to go here and do this document analysis. So it's probably a good place to check out if you're looking for activities where you can send your students just to do the work without having to, you know, go send them the material. You could send them there, have them do the activities, and have them report that information back to you. Okay, next. If you want to keep up with us, a great way to do that is to follow us on social media. So we are Street Law Inc. So if you just put Street Law in there, you get a couple weird things. But if you put Street Law Inc., you will get our Facebook page and Twitter. It's really how we let people know quickly what we're up to, what we have coming up, what we're planning. Okay, next. Another great way is the Educator e-newsletter that goes out periodically. And so on our landing page for streetlaw.org, you can scroll down to the bottom and there's a little teal bar that allows you to sign up. Make sure that you sign up for the Educator newsletter, although I believe that's the default one. But we do have newsletters aimed at our volunteers, lawyers, and things like that. Okay, go ahead, one more. Okay, so we're gonna do, I'm gonna try to look at the questions that are in the Q&A right now. You can put questions in the chat. I haven't really been able to multitask and look at the chat, but I will right now. So I'm gonna take the questions in the Q&A first. Oh, yeah, so I knew there would be a question about this, about the materials. So the material link, for some reason, and we've been trying to troubleshoot it all week, for some people works perfectly the very first time. They're able to access the material. It's no big deal. For other people, it's not working no matter what they do. For some people, it seems to work if they try to use an incognito browser tab, or if they use a search engine that they don't normally use to access their emails. So if you're having issues, just email me, cruffing, here, I'll put it in here again. I'm sure you've seen it a million places, but I'll put it in the chat. And I will, sorry, I don't type and talk at the same time. Well, I will make sure that you get them one way or another. I can send you the alternate instructions, or I can send you the files if everything else fails. Okay. Okay. Are they all required theoretically, but it seems that since United is being included? Yeah, so they said, I mean, you probably, if you read everything that they put out, know as much as I, but the official word is that units 1 through 3 will be covered on the exam, and that 5 will not. If you look in the course and exam description, Citizens United falls in Unit 5. That being said, if I were still in the classroom, I taught for 27 years. I just recently left the classroom, and 26 of the 27 years was AP Government. I would be teaching my students Citizens United. I think there is a good argument that it is a civil liberties case, that it is a freedom of speech case, but theoretically it's in Unit 5 and will not be covered. So I know that's a non-answer, but yeah, so there was another question about Citizens United, but that's all I know about Citizens United. Okay, if you have any other questions, you can put in the chat if you want to raise your hand. I'm also gonna, in the Q&A, I'm also gonna look in the chat really quick. Yeah, I know. So someone just put that College Board is covering Unit 5 in their webinars. I believe that is to be true, but right now, and I'm not going to contradict anything that you're hearing from them. I saw that still just as of late last night on their website, they're saying, College Board is saying that Unit 5 will not be covered, but I'm not. Listen, I think you can't go wrong with including it. You could go wrong with not including it. So, if you have any other questions, you can type them in Q&A. Jen, are there any questions that you saw in the chat that I should answer? Oh, where do we find, okay, someone wrote, where do we find the template? Right now, the template is only in this PowerPoint. So you can find the PowerPoint when you get your materials link. There'll be 2 PowerPoints actually. So I'm glad you wrote this question. I left the PowerPoint in there from the 2 webinars that I did before before College Board announced the modified exam, and they really focus on FRQ3. There's a lot of information about FRQ3. I modified this one based on the fact that FRQ3 will not be on this exam, but I left the PowerPoint in your materials link in case next year you might be looking for ideas to scaffold skills for FRQ3. So the template is in both of the PowerPoints, but it doesn't exist anywhere other than these PowerPoints right now. I may make something that could go in the store as a resource for all teachers and not just teachers who attended the webinars, but right now you're the only ones that have access to them, and you can just copy and paste it out of that. Okay, looks like some people had some really good suggestions in the chat for ways to modify things for online learning. So if you weren't following along with the chat, you might want to give the chat a look tomorrow. I mean, a look to see what is in there, because it looks like there's some really good information in there. Okay, can you go to the next slide, Jen? So before we go then, and if you have any more questions, I'll still keep my eye on the Q&A and I'll answer them if they pop up. I wanted to give a little commercial for the first student webinar ever that we're going to do on the 21st. And so this webinar is with a former teacher who came to our Supreme Court Summer Institute many years ago. And unfortunately, she fell in love with the Supreme Court so much that she stopped teaching, went to law school, and ended up clerking for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Her name is Amy Berquist, and we're going to do a very short introduction to her, but mostly an hour of pretty much Q&A from students about what it's like to clerk at the Supreme Court. I've prepared some things for her so we can maybe try to steer some of it to, you know, how do cases get to the court, how do you pick the cases that the court actually hears, and not just sort of fun stories about the court. So hopefully it'll be very educational. She's going to be great with the kids because she was a former teacher and she really knows where they're coming from. So if you'd like to encourage your students to sign up, teachers are also welcome to sign up, but we're going to try to give priority to student questions. And if you do come for your own information, know that we're going to have to assume that students don't really have much knowledge at all about the Supreme Court and background. And so it's going to be probably at a very, you know, simple student level. But please consider encouraging your students to attend that webinar. And next. And the last thing, and you can write some of this in the chat too, is Jen and I would really like to know what we can do for you to support what you're doing in the classroom right now. We've gotten a lot of great information from teachers from these webinars. There are a couple kinds of materials that we've developed for teachers specifically from requests during the webinars. So if you can't think of anything right now, but something dawns on you tomorrow, please email me at cruffing@streetlaw.org. I would love to know what I could do to help you. Again, there's the link to the materials. You should have also received it when you registered. And if you have difficulty accessing those materials, please let me know. And if worse comes to worse, I'll just send you an email with a ton of file attachments, and hopefully your firewall from your school doesn't block me out. Can you send the registration link? Yeah, I don't know that. Jen, are you able, because you actually have the PowerPoint open on your slide, to put the registration link for students?
So I can do that, but what's going to happen is I'm going to back out of screen sharing.
Okay.
In order to do that. Okay.
So let me just tell you where to find it then.
I'll do it while you tell them.
Yeah, if you go to our at-home resources page, and you can do that by just going to streetlaw.org, and the banner across the top, one of your options will be the at-home page. On that page, there's a section that's called webinars, and it has past webinars and future webinars, and the link will be right there. We also have it, I assume a lot of you may have seen this from our Facebook page. So we do also have on the Street Law Inc. Facebook page a post about it. So you might also be able to just repost that in some way. Oh, thank you. Whoever put that link there, I appreciate it. Oh yeah, and Jen made a great point. We would love to have questions ahead of time for the Amy Berquist webinar, so that we can, queue up some slides, maybe with visuals to go with it, to be helpful for the students. So if you could ask them to get their questions in ahead, they have a much better chance of getting their questions answered. So. Great. Well, we're a little bit early, but I wanted to thank you all very much for attending, especially in the evening. I know that's a big ask after you've spent all day trying to navigate the world of teaching your students at home, and maybe some of you teaching your children at home. So I really appreciate it. And please let us know what we can do to help you. Thanks a lot. Have a good night.